Welcome to the Chatter After podcast. I'm Mike. Joining me is our special guest, Antoine. Antoine, thanks for stopping by. We're here to talk some Avatar, The Last Airbender, and kind of an open discussion on how that show and that world kind of presents itself as opposed to other fantasy stories that we all have come accustomed to. First off, this is your first time on the channel, so you can take a second to let the people know where they can find you, who you are, all that great stuff.
Okay, yeah, I'm Antoine. The way I relate to Avatar is that I am a Avatar content creator, mostly on YouTube. Actually, just on YouTube period for my content creation. I'm also an author of a young adult series called TJ Young and the Orishas. And yeah, I like talking about Avatar. I started talking about Avatar via something called the Versus series, which was a lot more popular back in like the 2010s when that was like popping off. And then I moved on to like more general geek talks with Avatar and things like that. Previously, my channel had like Star Wars and Harry Potter and Mass Effect on it. Like I was what they call variety channel before. Now I'm just dedicated to Avatar. It's a lot easier just to dedicate to just like one thing versus like figuring out what's going on every single world.
Right.
So yeah, that's where I am now. I'm an exclusive Avatar content creator.
Nice. So you mentioned all those other worlds that you covered though with Star Wars and Harry Potter, and I think that's why this conversation is interesting because Avatar, my co-host Brandon couldn't make this episode. He actually just finished watching the series for the first time in its entirety.
Oh snap! I lucky because I think everybody wants to be able to like have amnesia or something, so they can rewatch it for the first time.
Yeah, go back to it. But one thing that always stuck out to me, one of my favorites of all time, is kind of how simple it is and its simplicity of its world building, right? Like it's this big fantasy story similar to Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings or Star Wars, right? But the power system's very basic, right? We have 4 elements, 4 nations, that's it. It doesn't take a lot to get into it. Do you think that's kind of like a benefit to the series of like, hey, it's very easy and accessible to a lot of audiences?
If you're looking for mass appeal and like a mass audience in the way that Nickelodeon, I think, is always vying for, because it's one of those smaller like animation studios, in comparison to like the Cartoon Networks, the Adult Swims, of course the Disney and things like that. You need to have that accessibility for people to get into it initially. And I was saying this before, like off camera, but like the fact that it's more Western leaning, I think is the reason for that, because you see in like a lot of Eastern stuff, like anime, you have a lot more deeper, hard magic systems, where rules on top of rules, to the point where like those characters will every 5 seconds recap what they just did, just so you can understand like what technique was used. Because, but I do like that to an extent, but I think I like that more in like novel form than I do in an active animation, right? And in Avatar, you don't get all that explanation. It's just all show, and there's not very much telling. There might be some telling, like maybe before a fight scene or like after a fight scene to explain something's going on, but like most everything is told through the martial art of whatever the bending art they're doing.
I think that's a huge benefit. I think that's why like a lot of people in the anime space will like say Avatar is kind of like a starter anime in that sense, where it's like, yeah, you have your complicated magic systems like a Jujutsu Kaisen or a Naruto, where you need a rule book to understand what just happened. And they have to spend half the episode telling you, like Kakashi's going to have to tell you what jutsu he just did, or Gojo's going to have to say what his domain expansion was. Whereas in Avatar, it very much just is waterbenders bend water, the end. And then 2 seasons later, they can also bend blood, by the way, under certain conditions. So like it builds up a little bit, but I think that just makes it a lot easier to follow and a lot easier to write, honestly.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that too, because I feel like the writers tend to write themselves into corners when they do try to expand and complicate the magic system of Avatar, particularly with Legend of Korra, like with bloodbending, because you were just talking about bloodbending and waterbending, and that being a subset of it. They like extended the power. Like there's this power creep on bloodbending that you can do it without the full moon, and that you can do it at daytime, and you can do it psychically, which is cool. There's so many debates or conversations that fans have, which I think that's where it should be. It should always be like a vague thing, and just let fans kind of like talk about what could be, or all that kind of stuff. Because then people get into like the idea of like, oh, well, if you could do bloodbending, then you should have like awesome healer surgeons who can do stuff like that, which they do get into a little bit with the novels and stuff like that. But then sometimes you kind of like break the system to the point where you have to like kill off those 2 villains that are like basically OP. So
yeah, one thing I respect though, like with the original series, because again, Korra, that's a whole other can of worms. That's a different video entirely, if we're being honest, on how that evolves and changes there. But one thing I did respect of like the Sozin's comment aspect of it, right? Of like, hey, the Firebenders took advantage of their one opportunity, the one I guess power up that they were able to get and wipe out their nation. 100 years later, Ozai was going to use it again. I think having those hard rules in place kind of negated a lot of the power creep, at least initially.
And even with bloodbending, it was capped by the full moon. It's like, okay, that's fine. Yeah, have your OP ability once per month for like a 12-hour period, 24-hour period, whatever it might be. Yeah, but then when you just do like all the time, what, why?
In comparison to something like Star Wars, right? I think that's a good place to start. Is like, we know the Force, and like the Force at times,
even that one's also pretty nebulous. Yeah, it could get like kind of trippy sometimes.
Yeah, like the Force is another thing where it's like that's vague, but sometimes it might be a little too vague. And the prequels tried to explain it a little bit more in detail with the midichlorians and all that stuff.
I actually like how you say that, because there's like a spectrum, right, of like magic systems. And you have like, in your anime where it's like super hard, exactly what each like thing can do, and then you have like the vagueness of like a Avatar, which might be in the middle, because there are some hard rules obviously with the bending, but then it's also a little bit vague in the specifics. And then you have like Star Wars, which the Force can be like sometimes extremely vague, and like you're like, wait, Jedi can do this, they can do that now, like where's the limit to Jedi, like.
It's so fascinating to me, and I think that's again why I personally gravitate to Avatar more, I think, than a lot of fantasy stories, because I am that type of person who will be forever overthinking everything. So having structure, I think, is a benefit for me. And like we have, kind of goes back to expanding on it in small doses, because like we have the Kyoshi novels, which they introduced like
by the way, I say this on my channel all the time, but I'm gonna just spread it like wildfire. Read the Kyoshi novels, everyone, please, and thank you. You'll thank me later.
They're amazing. They're also on Audible. If you don't want to read it and you just want to listen to it, do that too. They're amazing. But like they introduced like swift steps, right? Swift stepping, which is kind of like
stepping. Yeah, there's also dust stepping. There's misstepping, which is like, how did that die off? That seems very useful.
I know, right? That's another thing though. Like for that time period, they introduced something where like reading it, I'm like, I kind of want to see. Yeah, I need these anime.
Yeah, like can that be brought up again? I mean, we are gonna have an Earth Avatar series. Whenever this new movie comes up, and Paramount Plus isn't bought out by Warner Brothers or by the Weather Channel guy, whatever's going on with Paramount right now. But yeah, I actually like Kyoshi is actually, and people are surprised when I said it's top 3 stories for me. In Avatar, total. Like my top 3 Avatar favorites are book 3 Fire of Airbender, book 3 Change, Korra, and then it'd be the Kyoshi novels. Could even be the Kyoshi is like 2 sometimes for me, and that's because they have a very, very fascinating villain. They even explain why Kyoshi lived to be like 230 years, and it's because she has this crazy earth bending, bone bending thing where she can extend her life, which is another like one of those lost art forms that came about with Guru Lahima, being one of the airbenders that was introduced in Legend of Korra. And also I should preface, I am not a Legend of Korra hater, nor am I even a Legend of Korra disliker. I actually like it quite a lot. I do have my quibbles with it. I'm not one of those people who are like, yeah, it's amazing, shut up, you haters. It's like, no, there's issues with Korra, but I like really, really enjoy Korra, particularly book 3 was I hear, and Guru Lahima.
Book 3 is honestly peak Avatar for me. It's like top.
Pretty awesome. Yeah, like, and the fact that and the ending and her being like disabled, and then even how they even follow that up in book 4 where 3 years pass and it's like, no, yeah, she's got PTSD, as you should in a situation like that,
Going for if we actually are ranking them, it's I'm probably book 2 Airbender, Kyoshi's first novel, and then Change for Korra. So like,
oh, it's funny. Actually, the second novel for Kyoshi is what really won me over, particularly because of the false avatar Yoon and all the stuff that was going on with him. How far do we could talk as deeply as we want, right? About any of these stories, right? Okay,
sure.
I'm not sure if like a spoiler. Well, also spoilers. So if you are intending to read the Kyoshi novels, which you should do, you should stop listening right now. But come back.
We'll put a timestamp in the description and everything, so you can come back. Go.
But yeah, what I like so much about that, the scene that has always stuck out to me, was after he had his battle with Father Glowworm, which is one of the spirits that was able to determine that he was not the Avatar. And he had this like week-long fight with this spirit in the spirit world. And he comes back and he's like I believe he's in the desert, if I'm not mistaken. I know it's like he's parched and he's looking for water. He goes to like this tavern, and the bartender there is very disrespectful to him. And he's like, "Hey, do you know who I am? I'm you. I'm the Avatar. You know, I mean, granted, to the world, he's still the Avatar. We know at this point it's Kyoshi. But you know, he's being entirely disrespectful. He's like, well, fine, if you are, you know, who you say you are, bin that water, you know, from the wherever it was, it's from the bucket, and put it in your cup, whatever." And that makes him so angry because like his entire life he thought, you know, he was the Avatar. He's been told, he's been put up on this pedestal that you're like the next great savior of the world. And that all comes crashing down. And he basically creates a new form of earthbending where he's able to melt earth elements, like he could like clay, or like he basically do like a clay bending sort of thing, which is basically him trying to reach out to water, right? Because he himself does not have that ability. So, but the way you can sort of manifest that is through clay, and the fact that he did that is the same thing that you kind of see as an evolution for other benders who kind of have those sort of like in-betweeners, or like Iroh, right? The way that he studied the water benders to figure out lightning redirection. I love stuff like that in Avatar. I don't like when they do like the power creep stuff, but I like when a character breaks down their element and uses it in a different form similar to another element. Like that's the kind of expansion that I like from Avatar. Not so much like the, let's just make it energy beams and spirit, you know, energy, that you know, that kind of stuff. Love that scene. Also his just progression to that story. Again, it's literally top 3 story for me in Avatar across the board. You know?
Yeah. I love that moment. And I'm glad you kind of mentioned that, because that leads into what we were talking about before of like the simplicity of the magic system allows for us to make those leaps and like be surprised and excited of like, yeah, he's still earthbending at its core. That is what he's doing. But seeing them transform it, that's why the moment when Toph learns to metal bend for the first time, it's so satisfying.
And that's what I love too, is because that is not actually, because people like, you know, and that's like the term metal bending, but it's not really metal bending, because you're not actually bending the metal, you're bending the unrefined earth within the metal. So it's really just a very minute version, and stuff like that. Like that's when like Avatar in terms of the magic system is like my jam, when stuff like that happens. You know, it's like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. You know,
I love it. I think that again gets us to nerd out about it a lot, because one thing that I've learned on this anime journey I've been going on, I've never was a fan of it growing up, but like in my adulthood I've been watching it a lot more, is at a certain point you kind of just reach a limit where it's like Naruto is just throwing a giant Rasengan every single fight. No matter what he does, he adds lightning to it, he adds fire to it, but like it's the same move every time, because they've reached their limit, they've reached their cap, whereas Avatar still finds new and interesting ways. Like when Zahir revealed that we can bend the air out of somebody's lungs.
Yeah, which apparently has been around. It's that it's like, I think it's one of like those war crime type abilities, right? You can't just go around suck people's, you know, air out of their lungs or whatever. Stuff like that, just because it makes you work harder too, I think, as a creator. If you have this simple magic system that you don't work outside of, you just deepen, you know? Like I think it's way better when you just deepen it.
I kind of want to talk about the evolutions of those things though, right? I think we talked a little bit about Kyoshi, but like in Avatar specifically, I think one of the benefits The Last Airbender had was having Aang only know one element, and then seeing him learn the other ones, and like they progress and progress. That's why when we get to Katara being this prodigy, learning bloodbending from Hama, that is terrifying and scary and so effective, and it becomes one of my favorite parts of the entire franchise, because like, yeah, this darkness in Katara could have creeped out at any moment.
That's just like, the case with like caretaker characters. I call her like the extreme Hufflepuff, because the people that's a Harry Potter reference, by the way, again, because I multifaceted geek here. If you're not familiar with, even though it's Harry Potter, everybody knows about it, but Hufflepuffs are the ones that are represented by the badger mole, and famously badger moles are known for being like looking like, oh, they're little cute little rodents or whatever, right? But if you mess with their young, they will freaking, you know, attack with a fierceness. And that's the same thing that Katara is. It's like Katara is very sweet, very compassionate, but the second you mess with family, or you mess with like someone closer, like the way she had with Zuko when she took him into the other room, was like, they all might have forgiven you, but you slip up one more time, I'm going, not only am I, you know, going to hurt you, I'm going to end you. like that. And she was serious. That was not a threat. That was like I'm sorry, that wasn't like that was a full-on threat. Like, this is going to happen to you, Zuko. You don't mess with Katara.
You don't, but also again, that's the evolution of her relationship with Zuko. This is why, full disclosure, I don't ship Zutara because of moments like this where it's like he betrayed her trust
pretty hard,
pretty bad. Like, and then Aang died that same day, essentially, right? Like that's traumatic for her.
If she didn't have her healing water, Aang is dead right now.
Seriously, cycle over.
Yeah, and he was in the Avatar state, so like, and then people were really bad.
So for her to hold a grudge makes total sense for a character. I get it. That shows that everybody's got their limits. But
well, it makes sense too because it was specific to her, right?
Right.
Because with Zuko's relationship with Aang, it was kind of just like, oh yeah, we've been playing cat and mouse for like the past few years. No one else had the same sequence that Katara had with Zuko when they were in the catacombs, because they had that heart to heart, right? And like, and that's the thing with Katara. If she opens her heart to you, and you crush it, then that's it. You know what I mean? Like yeah, exactly. Like you don't get close to Katara and then break her heart like that. That's bad. That's bad news for you.
Yeah. Good thing Aang knew better, because that marriage would have been a little bit rough, a little rocky.
but actually, funny you mentioned that, because today's Downsize Day that we're recording this, and I put a poll talking about like Katara is like the love interest that the fandom always puts her against. So it's like Aang, obviously, Zuko, Haru, and Jet. And someone had a top comment that I thought was really, really good, saying that, the different relationships she could have with all the people, and why it was so great that she had Aang. And something that people don't bring up enough about relationships is that Aang's like the only one there that would make her happy. Like Aang, the cool thing about Aang and his superpower isn't just that he's the Avatar, in my opinion, in that first series. It's because he's a hopeful freaking kid who's come into this war-torn world that's been at war for 100 years. It's not just that he comes back and he's like this all-powerful, demigod situation. I mean, that's part of it, obviously. But the main thing, that main superpower, is that he's just a friendly guy. You know what I mean? Like, he's just a fun-loving, which the world needed at that time. Is like someone to come in and be like,
hope,
"Hey guys, it was cool." Like the best way to represent it is hope. Katara's favorite word is the headband episode in book 3 of Avatar, when he comes to the Fire Nation school, and he hears about all this propaganda about, like, the Air Nomads, and like, what, we never had a standing army. He's like, what? No, they never had a standing army, and that sort of thing. And then seeing how constricted the Fire Nation was, teaching them that, like, you guys used to be like the best dancers of like all the nations. Like, let me show you guys some dance tapes that you guys clearly have forgotten. That episode to me, because after the war is over, it's not just about like stopping the enemy. It's about rebuilding the world too. And which is why I'm actually really looking forward to the new movie coming out from Paramount, the adult Aang thing, because I would want to see that aspect of Aang being shown, because I think that's truly where the legend of Aang happens. It is him bringing that joy back to the world versus like the more action-packed war-torn part of it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that to me is a testament to Aang's spirit, right? I talk about episode 1, The Boy in the Iceberg, being like the perfect pilot, the perfect introduction to this franchise. And one of the things that stands out to me is like the moment Aang opens his eyes, right, and he sees Katara, and he's just like, "Hey, you guys want to go penguin sledding?" And it's like his spirit is so infectious. And you even mentioned that with the headband episode, where it's like he brought joy to those kids. And that's part of why I think Aang is such a fascinating character, is that.
And that's one of the parts that Katara was like making eyes at Aang. Like she has a few times, but like that was the first episode where it was like solid, like, this kid, like,
yeah. So like their relationship is so great to me, and I think that's why I love Aang as a character, because he has that hopefulness to him, like a Superman, right? Where he's inspiring people to
Superman, yes.
Yeah, he's inspiring those around him just by being a good dude, by being a fun person, like him, even with Zuko. In that, I don't remember the name of the episode, but the Firebending Masters, right? Where in that episode where like Zuko just starts to like melt, and like they start becoming like this big brother, little brother dynamic between the two, just because Aang is having fun with Zuko. And like I like seeing the walls between these characters melt around Aang, because he's from a different time, he's from a different era. And so you're right, saying that's one of his superpowers, I think, is a great way to put it, because he does change everybody around him.
And the blue spirit too, that we got that first indication after the Blue Spirit episode where he saved Zuko after he got hit with the arrow. They were in the forest, and he waited for Zuko to wake up. Right, he could just left him there, and be like, "All right, I'm out." You know, he like waited to see he was okay, and he was just there, like talking to him, saying, you know, if this was like 100 years ago, like I think he mentioned that he had a friend. I forget what the name of the friend was.
Kuzan.
That was sorry, Kuzan, right? And which he uses again, I think, in book 3, right? As his
he goes
exactly. And then he says, "Yeah, we used to be such good friends. We had so much interest in each other. We in this situation, I feel like you and me, could be friends." And you can see for a moment, Zuko's like, because Zuko's always been a good dude. He's just been his upbringing was just crap, and you in his eye, like you can, it's just animation. It's just a still frame, and it's probably like just zooming in. You could tell like him being like, "Well, yeah, you seem like you're cool. Like, why am I attacking you?" Like you can see all of this like going in the split second in his mind, and then him attacking him, being like, "No, I choose death." It's like, "Oh, Zuko, come on!" Like you have so many, and that's the great thing too, is that they gave Zuko so many chances to turn, and he always turns away from it. Goes a little bit, turns away from it. It's a really good show. Like they do a really good job with with all of this, everything.
It's a pretty good show. 19 years later, we still talk about it.
Yeah.
But like even Zuko as a character, we can talk about that for a second.
Well, he's my all-time favorite character, so forever on that one. Yeah.
I'm right there with you. He's my favorite too. But one thing I find interesting, getting back to like the world building aspects of everything, of like Zuko and his kindness kind of screw him over early in the series, of like him kind of speaking up for people at that war meeting, and then he gets the burn and blah blah blah. Adventure starts. But I think it's really interesting that his lack of lightning bending and how that kind of plays into his journey, and like him being able to learn how to redirect it. He's never able to like learn how to channel it, at least in the original series.
Right. Well, no, even in the comics that take place after, I think the comics are now like 3 years after the original series. He still has not been shown to do lightning generation, just redirection.
I put the disclaimer there just in case, because I haven't read all the Korra books. I'm like, I don't know if they ever mentioned that. I don't.
Oh no, never in the Korra books they mentioned that. Yeah, that's right. He shows up. I forgot, the old version of Zuko shows up in that too. And there's no lightning generated, and it would have been helpful for the people he was fighting against at that point. So it seems like he never learned it, and which I'm cool with stuff like that. Like I like when people's powers and their specialties are specific, and not just like, oh, you're powerful, so you have every ability now. It's like, no, like let's see how his dragon fire develops, which we see once in the comics. He uses his dragon fire that he learned from the original firebending masters, but you don't see him ever use it ever again. So I was like, hey, can we see an expansion on that? Like, let's see what this rainbow fire is all about.
Maybe in the movie.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, this is the opportunity where you guys can expand that, because y'all kind of left that hanging. What's he doing with that ability?
I'm so interested to see, like, just a second and talk about that. I'm so interested to see what Mike and Brian do, revisiting the original Team Avatar, because like expanding with Korra and all that stuff is great, but like going back to something you've kind of left for 15 years roughly. How do you approach those characters and their dynamics and all that?
Well, and the transition too, like seeing like what makes it that Toph is gonna, because I know that's a big thing. People are like, Toph would have never been a cop. I was like, life situations can change you. Like if you look at yourself, like us, like if you look at yourself, like social media 15 years ago, and you're like, who was that? Like what are you talking about? You sound crazy. Like
there's
you're
also
not the same person. Yeah.
Just talk about this before we move on real quick. Toph being a cop, I think, makes some sense. Like, she's probably like, hey, I was reckless and all this stuff. Maybe if I was the person in charge, I can be lenient.
Many criminals end up becoming police officers, because they know the game on the other side, right? And they're very effective.
Right. If you're the one making the rules and making the change, like, she probably wants to be in that position. But anyway, you can continue.
Yeah, but again, like that's why I hope to see with this adult version of the movie, is like seeing these transition points of these characters and why they become the way they are, or what happened to Suki and Sokka, stuff that we didn't get, which I actually do enjoy from Legend of Korra, is that they didn't give every freaking explanation. That's actually one thing I don't like about Star Wars these days, is that everything is a callback. Like the galaxy is like 2 miles big, like everybody knows each other. I actually really, really respect it that a lot of the time with Korra, it's like, well, that character just is not involved with this because they had no interaction with Korra during that time period, which is realistic to just how the world works, and not everybody is going to get with their, high school sweetheart. Although, like, what's going on with Sakatsuki? That's the one thing I'm like, what's going on with Sakatsuki? Like, can we see what's going on in the adult version of that?
Yeah, like even if they don't like end up together or stay together, it's like they are Team Avatar, so it's like we got to check in on them a little bit and be like, hey, this is where Suki went. I do appreciate you're right though. I love that Korra made those tough calls, and the fandom didn't respond great to all of them. Like, Aang's a bad dad. It's like, well, no, Aang is just a realistic person.
Oh yes, okay. I'm so glad you said that, because every time I hear that, I go, like, because to me, when I see that, I'm like, wow, freaking great choice, because it's a very, very unusual circumstance that he was in. He had 2 kids.
Yeah,
one was a non-bender. Second one was a waterbender. He's like, where's the? Because like, don't forget the name of the show, guys. Yeah. It's scrolling right below us right here. The Last Airbender. If you have a son who is literally the only thing you could do to continue the airbending tradition, yes, you're going to give that son a little bit more priority. And yes, there's gonna be some animosity from your other children who feel like you're giving them more attention, but it makes sense. And also, it just happens even without the whole Last Airbender thing and having to impart all this culture.
Yeah,
it happens in life. Like, if people don't want to hear it ever, the parents have favorites, and that's just naturally gonna happen, and that's just realistic. And I prefer realism in that aspect, not ultra realism or anything like that, but like stuff like that where you see so when things like that happen in Korra, I was like, I actually really appreciated that sort of a thing. For some fans who kind of, I feel like, want the wish fulfillment, right? The idea that everything is perfect and it's always going to be like that. And
not to make this a whole Star Wars bit, but that's how you get the Luke Skywalker Last Jedi situation.
Yes,
where it's like...
that is exactly. And I'm not happy about that, because I'm no longer, like, I'm literally not even a Star Wars fan. Like, I don't call myself Star Wars fan anymore. I'm a Star Wars casual now. I'm not a fanatic. I am a casual. And I'm much more happy for it. But yeah, that's how you get it. When you have that version of it, where you have like let's just call back everything and just make everything fan service. Yeah, you get modern day Star Wars.
Yeah. I think Aang having those flaws though, because like I think Korra was also really mature in how it approached it, of like, nobody ever said Aang was a bad person or a bad father. That like the fandom kind of
that's
made
what the
those leaps and jumps to it. But like Aang, like you said, I don't even think he was really playing favorites necessarily. It's that this kid will be the Last Airbender.
Yeah,
once I die,
exactly. Like,
he's I need to make sure he knows our culture, everything. Our history, where all the temples are, how to take care of the bison. Like, he has to give him every single thing in Air Nomad history, because he's all that's left. And even that is a different side of pressure that the other 2 kids don't see. And I think Korra approaches that very, very well, because Tenzin is also very rigid and like,
because that's obvious, right? Like that, because that's how you were taught, and then that trickles down to the children, which I think is a nice commentary about, like, the parent-child relationship and how you can pass traumas to your children, and then that gets passed down to Korra, but she's a different kind of personality, where she's like, no, I'm not gonna listen to that dogmatic approach that you have. And that's one of my favorite episodes of Korra, Leaf in the Wind. I get teary-eyed every time when she's in the pro bending arena, and then she starts doing the rotation, the leaf exercise. Every time I see that, it's like tears. You're learning, and then they have an understanding at the end of it, like him being less dogmatic with his airbending approach, and her being more open to his teachings.
Yeah, I really appreciate Korra's like the risk that they took with Korra of like, we had the Last Airbender, we're gonna do something completely different. We're gonna start off with somebody who knew they were the Avatar at a very young age. We're going to make that character know all 3 elements instead of the airbending, which is like a nice inverse of Aang. And that's gonna be her journey of like, you're great at pretty much everything but this one thing, and you have to figure it out and how to open yourself up to that. And so when that payoff finally comes, it does hit very hard, and I love it.
And that's across the board.
Such a fascinating dynamic.
Yeah, it is. And that's across the board with all Avatar projects. I feel I always appreciate that about Mike and Brian always want to do something different, because even Kyoshi is a very different story from like either Korra or Airbender. The Yang Chen book also different from they're always choosing different. And I appreciate that, not retreading the same ground.
Guys, if you enjoyed this, make sure you give us a like, subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Antoine's channel is linked down below. It's also going to be in that weird button thing that pops up at the end of all the videos. Do you have any projects or anything that you want to let the people know about?
I mean, right now I'm writing the third book in my young adult series. So if you're into like Percy Jackson, Harry Potter, that is called T.J. Young and the Orishas. The third book called The Hero's Equinox is coming out probably October of this year. But in terms of my YouTube channel, I'm currently working on Azula versus Kuvira. But Netflix Avatar is happening right now, so the next month is probably just going to be that, and so I can go back to like another versus video. But I'm really interested in that particular because it's one of the closest matchups that I engage with within the fandom because of how precise, because it's a battle of inches with their two abilities that they use.
Azula is such a fascinating versus matchup, I would say. Like, you don't spoil the conclusion or the outcome of your video, but like her studying other fighting techniques and styles on top of her bending prowess is very interesting. And
which is a cool thing. I'm happy to see with the live action, because it seems like they're doing the same thing with giving her like, you know, jack of all trades, but not a jack. Because usually the thing with jack of all trades is that you're like what's the saying go? A master of none. Oh, I can't remember what the actual. But
jack
like,
of all trades is a master of none. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But she's kind of like a master of all. So it's like, what?
Yeah. She's perfect, essentially. So, you know, that makes it fascinating. Oh, that's going to be a great one, though. Looking forward to that. We're definitely going to have the books linked in the description as well, so if everybody can check that out. They'll probably be in the pinned comment too, so people have easy access to it. Thanks again for joining us. You can also find my stuff over at Novice Cinephile. This episode is brought to you by the Amateur Otaku and the Chatter After. Subscribe. Make sure you check out the podcast in your podcast feed, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you get it. We will always be there for you. We're also covering Avatar, The Last Airbender, Netflix live on the live stream Monday. So if you had a chance to binge all the episodes the day they came out, tune in that following Monday. We're going to be live talking about it there. So you can just join us in the comments. Until next time, though, guys, stay flaming. Peace.